Hello everyone!
Welcome back to Book Discussions on Telescola. We are your hosts. I'm Mr. Darrell.
And I am Miss Maka.
Today, Ms. Maka, we have a huge classic to talk about.
Yeah? Could you please tell us the title of the book?
I'd love to. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer.
Oh, one of our favorite books from our childhood by Mark Twain.
You know, actually for my whole life, I remember that scene where Tom Sawyer goes and paints the fence and gets his friends to do it for him.
Yeah.
I've never forgotten that scene from childhood.
Why do you think it is so memorable for you?
It just sticks in your mind. You dream of being that guy. You dream of being Tom Sawyer when you see that he can get people to do what he wants for him.
Yeah, that's very nice.
You know what? People think of this as the great American classic.
Yes, definitely it is. First published in 1876, it portrays childhood during the pre-Civil War in 1840s in an affectionate but realistic way. Yeah.
The power of Mark Twain's writing.
Yeah, because of the reason that it is more children book. It is realistic, but of course chooses different language, different perspective.
Well, it's not as serious as Huckleberry Finn. It's a lot easier to understand.
Yeah, but Mr. Darrell, before we move to our discussion, let's look at the agenda of the program for today. Of course, we'll start with the introduction of the vocabulary. Then we will talk about Mark Twain, the author of the book. After, we'll show you the summary of the book.
We'll look at some of the main characters, some classic characters, look at the setting of the book, 19th century America, and think about the main themes of the story.
Yeah, and of course, we will give you a homework, and I am very sure that our audience will do it with pleasure.
You always did your homework, didn't you?
Let's not talk about this.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, but of course, yeah, I tried to do my homework all the time.
Of course.
Whenever possible. Okay, now Mr. Darrell, let's look at the vocabulary part of the book.
The first word is a verb, to deduce. To deduce. To analyze or understand a conclusion after something has been investigated or thought about.
დასკვნის გამოტანა.
Reluctance is the next word. Reluctance, it's a noun. To be unwilling or to be disinclined to do something. You don't want to do it.
უხალისობა.
Our next word is an adjective. Vague. Vague, that's how it's pronounced. Vague. Not clearly or explicitly stated or expressed.
ბუნდოვანი, გაურკვეველი.
Our next verb, to wane. To wane. To decrease in strength, intensity, to get weaker somehow.
შემცირება, კლება.
Our next noun is ingenuity. Ingenuity, the quality of being cleverly inventive or resourceful, your inventiveness.
მახვილგონივრულობა.
Our next word, an adjective, is stolid. A bit rare, I suppose, stolid. This is when you're not easily stirred or moved mentally. You're unemotional and you're impassive. Nothing can really change you too easily.
მშვიდი, აუღელვებელი.
Our next noun is expedition. Expedition, an excursion, journey, or voyage made for some specific purpose.
ექსპედიცია.
And the last word is commotion. Commotion, violent or tumultuous motion, agitation, noisy disturbance.
ღელვა, მღელვარება.
Now, Ms. Maka, let's move on to Mark Twain, one of the greatest American authors.
Yeah, indeed he was. Mark Twain, pseudonym of Samuel Longbourn Clemens. He was born on 30th of November in 1835. Florida, Missouri, and he died on 21st of April in 1910. So he was an American humorist, lecturer, journalist, novelist who acquired international fame for his travel narratives, especially The Innocents Abroad, also The Life on the Mississippi. For his childhood books, like boyhood books, travel books, adventures books, especially The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
He had a great sense of humor. One of the things you would have loved about him, if he were here, would be the way he could make jokes and make insightful commentary about anything that was around him. So he's a distinctive humorist. And he overcame probably kind of a limited childhood to become one of the most popular American figures of all time.
Yeah, and he was born like 2 months prematurely and was in relatively poor health for about 10 months. And in his childhood, Mark Twain was a mischievous boy and a very good prototype of his main character, Tom Sawyer. Twain's formal schooling ended after age 12 because of the death of his father.
Like another famous author, Hemingway, he got into journalism first, so that's and he learned how to write and think as a writer through journalism, through working for the newspaper trade. He rose from a lowly journalist to become the editor, sub-editor of the place he worked at, and it was a good time for journalism, and so he made his name that way.
Yeah. So after traveling to Europe for a lecture series, the turning point, Twain experienced a turning point in his career, and Twain's newest novel, that was called The Gilded Age, written in collaboration with Charles Dudley Warner, was published in 1873.
So as you mentioned, he died in 1910, and his wife and children survived him, of course. He had, by that point, become respected by academia as well, by universities and so on. He was given diplomas and degrees.
Yeah. So with his death, many volumes of his letters, articles, and fables were published, including many famous articles and letters like the letters of Quintus Curtius Snodgrass and many others.
Well, perhaps more than any other author, basically what we're trying to say is he is the superstar personality as well of American culture.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's move on to the summary of this classic tale, although probably many people have read it and don't really need a summary.
But we should make sure that no one is left without knowing the summary of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. So, the story revolves around the youthful adventures of the novel's schoolboy named Tom Sawyer, as we mentioned. He is the protagonist of the novel, whose reputation precedes him from causing mischief and strife. Tom lives with his aunt Pauline, half-brother Sid, and cousin Mary in the town of Saint Petersburg, just off the shore of the Mississippi River.
Yes, this is not Russia, Saint Petersburg, but it's been named after the Russian town. It's described as a small town where people are religious. The social network is very close, and familiarity is the main feature of this town.
Yeah, and at school, Tom is equally flamboyant and attracts attention by causing lots of trouble. And I think for many people, it would be very, they would relate themselves to their old age, right? Yeah.
When there's a girl named Becky Thatcher that Tom kind of falls in love with, and he immediately thinks that they should get engaged, in fact. But when Tom accidentally blurts out that he was engaged before to a girl named Amy, he ruins the relationship with Becky forever.
Yeah, but one night, so we can see that he has a pal, Huck, They both, Huck and Tom, they sneak out at midnight to the town's graveyard. The two, they both expect to see the ghosts in this area. After hearing voices approach them, they were very scared. They are very scared, and they run away. But at that night, they witness the murder. Firstly, a fight and then a murder. And Huck and Tom vow to keep this secret and not to tell anyone.
Mm-hmm. Things get serious pretty quickly there.
Yes.
So Tom assembles a gang around himself, Joe, Harper, Huck as well. And the three decide that they have had enough of a normal society of that place, St. Petersburg, and they run away to Jackson Island in the middle of the Mississippi River.
Yeah. So when the boys are missing, the whole town assumes that they are dead and they are drowned in the river, and the villagers drag the river for their bodies. In the darkness of the night, Tom sneaks off the island to return home and leave a note for his aunt, Polly, as we mentioned, informing her that he is not dead. Instead, he overhears Polly and Mrs. Harper making plans for his funeral.
And they wait until the funeral happens, and that's when they sneak back into town and announce that they're not dead.
That would be really funny to see, I would say. Funny and happy, I would say, right?
Well, it sounds like, things that kids would do. And Mark Twain obviously must have been a kid at heart to have written stories that perfectly express what kids do. Yeah,
and maybe these are some stories that are real from his life. Who knows?
Yeah.
So summer vacations roll around, and Tom is a bit feels bored. The murder trail starts, however, and he and Huck both become consumed with guilt. So they kind of think were they right to vow that they would never say the secret, or they should say, so they should speak up. So Tom is the one who breaks down and testifies on the last day of Muff Potter's trial, saving Muff from accusing and
from being accused.
From being accused and sentenced.
In short, there are plenty of adventures in the book, but we should just remember that it is a book about the joys of childhood and the acceptance of change. And probably, we all have a little bit of Tom Sawyer in all of us.
Of course. When I just hear the name Tom Sawyer, I immediately think of my childhood. Yeah, so now it is time to ask a question to our audience. So why does Tom Sawyer avoid school?
Tom Sawyer considers school captivity and has an especially hard time facing it on Mondays after a weekend of freedom or from its fetters.
Like a lot of kids, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. Mr. Darrell, what was your favorite day of the week during school time?
Oh, definitely.
Do you remember?
Sundays, Saturday.
Saturdays?
Oh, school days.
Yeah.
Friday,
because it was the last day of the week. For me, the Thursday was the best day for me because usually we had few lessons on that very day, and Friday was the one with many lessons.
Few lessons, you would have probably got a lot of chances at adventures on that day.
Yes, of course, we had. So now let's move on to our characters list. So who is the first one? And I think you won't be surprised that this is Tom Sawyer, the protagonist of the novel. Living with his aunt in St. Petersburg in Missouri, don't mix it up with the Russian city, Tom has a penchant for adventures and showing off, constantly getting into mischief. He plays hooky from school and would rather go swimming than tend to his Sunday school lessons.
Some key characteristics to think about. He's blessed with an active imagination. He's hungry for attention, so when he acts up and when he wants to be the center of attention, it's because he wants people to like him, and he wants to be perceived well by people.
Yeah, and however, we've talked about lots of childish characteristics of Tom, we can say that he's extremely clever and possesses an incredible insight on human nature. So throughout the novel, Tom must learn the lesson how to listen to his conscience and become accountable for his actions.
So it's a story about him growing up. Growing up. Let's look at Huckleberry Finn. Now I think we've talked about Huckleberry Finn, the book, previously, but here's a review of his character. He's slightly different in this book. Now he is the town's social pariah. That means everyone kind of wants to avoid him and they think he's bad news or he's kind of a troubled kid. He's the son of an abusive and drunken father who left town, and Huck has grown up without parental guidance and authority figures.
Yeah, so because he can smoke pipe and never has to attend church on Sundays, he is the envy of every schoolboy and is the threat and nightmare of every mother in town. Huck and Tom often have lots of adventures together, and they are both quite superstitious. Although disregarded by the sociables, we can see that Huck is very kind and has a kind spirit and consideration for others.
So he's not really a bad kid.
No, not at all.
He just kind of grew up in bad circumstances.
Yes.
Let's move on to Becky Thatcher. Becky Thatcher, the girl that kind of has a thing with Tom for a short while. She's the daughter of a judge, and she's Tom's age and has recently moved into town. She's a bit more proper, prim, and she's the opposite of Tom in these ways. She's never been in trouble, and she's used to obeying her mother's words. So with her blonde hair and dressy dresses, she quickly wins Tom's affection and attention.
Yeah. Okay, our next character is a complete opposite of Tom Sawyer. This is Tom Sawyer's half-brother, Sid, who always tries to report on the wrongdoings of his half-brother. A goody two-shoes, he's a punctual and studious pupil, so he loves studying, a very diligent one.
I can see why he would probably have annoyed Tom.
Yeah.
And finally, we should have a look at one of the villains of the book, Injun Joe, classic name. The antagonist of the novel, guilty of several murders. So unlike Huck, Injun Joe actually is a bad guy. He possesses a violent temperament and is set on seeking revenge on those who have treated him harshly in the past. He's not as innocent as the two boys. He has a darker heart, and he eventually gets pursued by the village authorities for his bad behavior. So it must have been a good luck that he didn't notice those two children while they witnessed the murder. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now it is time to ask a question to our audience.
Here's a question. You've heard us speak about Tom. When did he start to change his personality?
When he first witnesses a murder, he begins to change. He has learned through experiencing various dangers and mistakes to value the resources of his home and community, to accept a certain majority of outcome authority.
Great answer. That's exactly how Mark Twain shows the growth of this character.
Yeah, exactly. And also maybe this child, because of being so curious and experiencing lots of things, studies more lessons of life.
Maybe a child needs to be mischievous in order to find more about himself.
A little, not too much, of course. Okay, so we have another question to our audience. What are some negative, as we've already mentioned, what are some negative traits of Tom Sawyer in a book?
Some of Tom's negative traits are his mischievousness, ability to manipulate others, and selfishness.
Yeah.
So, he does have some negative characteristics. It's not like he's an angel.
Sure, of course. There is always the bad side of a personality in every person.
And the characteristics he mentioned, you don't want to support or promote. You don't want to be those things.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Let's move on to the setting. We're looking at the when and the where. I'll handle the when a little bit, if it's okay.
Of course.
So it is set in St. Petersburg, Missouri, around the mid-1800s. Well, it's a small town, as we mentioned earlier, but it's got everything a boy could ever want. It's got a community that's not really that bad, so he can have adventures, he can have fun, and he can be a boy growing up.
Yeah, and what about the where part? Lush forests, a wide river, an island that is perfect for playing pirates and to have some caves and hide in it. It's got your standard issue, small town stuff, a church, a courthouse, a schoolhouse, of course, and etc. Lots of characteristics for small towns. But it's also got a spooky place, of course, complete with an eerie graveyard, a temperance tavern selling bootleg liquor and haunted houses.
Sounds like a fun place. I have a question
for children, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a question for you. Did you grow up in a village, like in a small town, or in the big town?
I grew up in Tbilisi, in the biggest town, the biggest city of Georgia, I would say.
Do you wish you had grown up in a small village, or no?
I have spent some time, like in summer, in spooky places, also in the villages, with like in abandoned houses, and that was really interesting. And I still remember those days, the feelings.
Yeah, something about small towns and that kind of thing.
Of course.
Well, let's have a question for the audience now. How does the novel capture the essence of the setting?
I can make a general comment. Twain really tried to establish the atmosphere of St. Petersburg, Missouri in the mid-1800s. The culture of the South during that time was illustrated by accents, slave culture, and the absurdity of small-town white culture.
Yeah, a good answer, very good answer. That's a thoughtful response to the setting.
Yeah, of course. Now, of course, there are some main themes in the book, but we have chosen hopes, plans, and dreams.
Oh, good one.
Mr. Darrell.
Tom's got so many hopes, plans, and dreams, as you mentioned, that it's hard to know where to start. He's a dreamer, basically. He's got all the boyish notions of being a robber, a pirate, and so on. He, like so many kids, wants to find adventure and treasure. They want to go treasure hunting. So why should we care about his dreams if they're ordinary? This is really the point. That's why he's got such big dreams and wild plans.
Exactly. So in the Adventures of Tom Sawyer, we're supposed to identify ourselves to Tom and his desires. We're supposed to rejoice when they are met and be disappointed when they are not. And when his dreams come true and they're just plain silly and confused, well, then we're just supposed to laugh.
You know what? This book is basically about the power of imagination. Because by the end of the novel, by doing all of those little things that he does, Tom has gotten exactly what he has always dreamed of getting.
That's very interesting. And now let's have a question to our audience. So, can a child have a plan about his future life from his childhood?
Probably a child won't call it a plan or a dream or a desire, as it seems unachievable in childhood. Later, it is quite possible.
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, children see it as a dream because that's what they want, but then they put it into a plan, right? And to achieve whatever they want.
Yeah, but probably there are some things that kids can't, no matter how much they dream, be practically capable of. For example, I wanted to be an astronaut.
Yeah, Mr. Darrell, but being an astronaut is not unrealistic, right? You just didn't follow it, or you just changed your mind.
Now I feel like a failure.
No, it's not a failure. You just maybe changed your mind, and that's it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay. So now I think it is high time to wrap everything up. And of course, we started with the author part, Mark Twain.
And the summary of the book, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, he gets into all sorts of hijinks, adventures, and there are some dangers that he has to avoid as well.
Of course, the characters who make up the story and make it even more interesting. And the main character is Tom Sawyer here.
And the setting is the 1840s in the small town of St. Petersburg.
Yeah, and the main themes, these are plans, desires, and hopes.
Very hopeful of us.
Yeah, of course.
Let's look at the vocabulary. Let me just say it one more time for pronunciation purposes and to remind you of the words we said at the beginning. They were to deduce, reluctance, vague, to wane, ingenuity, stolid, expedition, and commotion.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now let's look at the homework part.
Yes, as we have mentioned, like all of us have a little Tom Sawyer in us. So try to remember one story from your childhood that would prove this statement and show that you were as adventurous as Tom.
Yeah. როგორც უკვე ვახსენეთ, ყველა ჩვენთაგანში ცხოვრობს ტომ სოიერი. თუ ეს ასეა, ეცადეთ გაიხსენოთ ისტორია თქვენი ბავშვობიდან, წარსულიდან, რაც დაამტკიცებს ამას და აჩვენებს, რომ თავგადასავლების ისეთივე მოყვარული ხართ, როგორიც ტომ სოიერია.
And make sure to send that to the address you see on the screen right now.
დავალებები გამოაგზავნეთ ეკრანზე მითითებულ მისამართზე.
Well, thank you, Ms. Maka, for the discussion on Tom Sawyer.
Thank you very much. Now I feel I have some kind of childish spirit for today.
The power of books.
Exactly.
And thanks to the audience as well for answering our questions.
Thank you. Thanks to the TV audience for watching us and listening to us.
And probably sending in the homework as well.
Yeah, probably.
Until next time then.
Next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.